When you talk about one of the advantages of doing phone is to be able to target a geographic district, which is of course how elections. And this is going to be the case for most of our folks.
That's right.
Who may be starting, probably most will be starting in a state assembly race. I don't think we got anyone running statewide. A few folks running for Congress. One way to do that is you can hopefully buy sample that is locating people, but then you have the issue of cell phones, which is difficult. How do you feel about sampling off the voter file, both in general and for my ability? Because I do know where you live then.
Right, you know where they live.
But
you then need to use a great phone matching service. And this varies tremendously from state to state. It varies from geography to geography. But if you've got a solid phone match service, then you've got two advantages. The third problem is, can you actually get these people on the phone to answer your questions? And traditionally for a good message testing poll, it was a 20-25 minute survey. You're just not able to do that anymore. So once you've done all of that, I think a real question you're going to have to ask is, what's a parsimonious way to test messages, to figure things out? And if you can't afford to or can't do such a long survey, you really need to you talked about priorities earlier. You need to get a sense of where people are in the election. But again, if you're running for state assembly, that's probably not going to give you as much information as you would want. In a primary, it might be 4 people have 12% of the vote, and most people are undecided. It's about what messages resonate, what issues matter the most, and then focusing your campaign on those issues. I mean, that really helps to bring the size of the world down accurately. And I think the fantasy of whether it's the West Wing or Veep or one of those other places that you can know down to the wire or down to the most granular level exactly how someone's going to vote before they know it is purely fantasy. I think really, and this is getting a little bit philosophical.
Ask President Clinton.
That's right, President
Hillary Clinton, right? Yeah.
Right. I'm getting a little philosophical here, but I think that one of the things that we found, and one of the critiques of polling is, well, they're not getting it right. What happened with the Trump election? And I think what you need to think about as a candidate is what you want polling for. And polling should not be to tell you for sure who's going to win. Right? There is uncertainty. There's uncertainty in life. There's uncertainty in elections. It should provide you with the strategy to give you the best odds of winning. And the candidate, this is just on an aside, we do tracking polls.
Because you were literally on a soapbox.
That's right. I'm on a soapbox. Yes, that's perfect. They would do tracking polls, and we would generally end the Thursday before Election Day. And you finish the Thursday before Election Day because then all the plans are set.
You can't do anything.
You can't do anything else.
So why do it?
The ads are at the stations. All the sheets are together. I guess today you could probably do some transformation, but they continue tracking, not because they're going to make a difference, but because they want to know who's going to win. And I think that one of the problems that pollsters have faced is that, and it's of their own making, is that they have become or had become oracles, and they were able to predict the future. And that helped to increase their value, increase their popularity. I mean, you would have never thought that nerdy pollsters would become pop culture icons, but they really did for a little while. What you need to do as a candidate is try to pull back from that and see the pollster for what they're best for, which is to build you a strategy. They should not be seen as the person you rely on to say, am I going to win? Am I going to lose? Who's going to win? Who's going to lose? Leave that to your religious leader. But for now, and as you work in a campaign, look at your pollster as your strategic partner, not as the person who's going to tell you the future.
It's interesting, and we've been talking to a couple pros, and a couple folks have said that they don't pay attention to the horse race number, which of course everyone does, but nevertheless,
that's a lie.
That's a lie. But what they're really paying attention to is their ability to move it, right?
Uh-huh.
So. A happier, you always want to be ahead rather than behind, right? But what makes you bummed is if you throw what you think are your best messages and it doesn't move it.
That's right.
Rather, like even if you do a poll where the horse race is behind, but you show, wow, if we are able to communicate that, then we actually do see some movement. That's how they're looking at polls.
That's exactly right, and that helps to correct for some of the potential sampling error, which is to say, that sure, if you have a garbage sample, you're not going to go anywhere. I mean, you're not going to have something that's useful. But if you have a sample that's not perfectly reflective, you can still learn a lot about your district and still learn a lot about the way people are moving. And it's exactly right to identify persuadables and see if you can persuade them.
So talk more about that whole notion of, it might not actually be 42 to 24, but even an imperfect sample is probably showing that something's moving at 5 or 6 or 10 in terms of movement. And do you think like that when you're doing polling now or when you're doing message testing?
Well, I tell you, in a perfect world, what you would do, in a perfect world with imperfect data, you would say, let's take this as one piece of the puzzle. We think the race is here, it may not be, but we feel very comfortable that these are the issues that are resonating across the electorate. But more important than that is, what other data are we bringing into the equation? Is this race getting traction in social media? That's not an indicator of who's going to win, but it gives you a sense of where some of the momentum is. What are we learning about our digital advertising? Is that tracking? The critique of that analysis is and again, a critique of elections is when you're counting yard signs, right? That doesn't really help give you a good sense of what's going on. But there's so much data about so many voters right now and so much information about where things are going that you can literally track the sentiment of different parts of the geography of your district if you're doing social in a good way. And that's actually an inexpensive way to get some sense of what's going on.
Let's maybe finish up with a couple specific nerdy things.
Yes.
What's your favorite way of doing likely voter models? Or is the answer you should look at a bunch of different likely voter models?
Well, I'll crib from from the person I worked with for many years, Mark Mellman. He made an important point, which really sticks with me today, not only for political work, but frankly for lots of other work, and even consumer packaged goods, which is, in a lot of ways, a likely voter model is a bit of a misnomer. Likely voters are an important piece of the puzzle, but there will always be 5 to 15% of your electorate that are unlikely voters, that are people that would not pass all of those screens because they do decide to come out even though they didn't plan to. And so what I love to do, and I think the best way to do it, is to look, to the extent you're using a voter file, is to use and this is something, of course, you're familiar with, is to use vote history as a way not to screen out people and not only to talk to those who have voted before, but to reproportion the electorate such that, let's say, and this is making numbers up, but let's say 20% of the voters voted in every single election of the last 4. Though that proportion you should then take those folks and weight them up to be 50% of the likely electorate, and work your way down to, let's say, 50% of voters, which is a pretty good example, only voted in 1 or less of the last 4 elections. You shouldn't make that 50%, but you shouldn't make that 0%. And that's a really smart way, I think, to include those who aren't likely to vote, and to discount that some people who are extremely likely to vote aren't going to vote, and then use that weighting to do that. But something we talked about earlier, Ken, is when you're talking to your pollster, they will give you a number and they will have a voter model. You should know what that is, but you should ask them to rerun the numbers to provide different examples of what different voter models would look like, both in terms of messaging, to make sure the messaging resonates under each of the scenarios, but also potentially for the vote itself.
New poll comes out this afternoon. Mm-hmm. You're not particularly familiar with the pollster. Right. First thing you look at?
You look at a couple things. If I'm not familiar with the pollster, I at least make sure that it's a real survey, a certain number of actual completes, done over a certain period of time, that they actually give you some information about the poll. The second thing, which I do for every poll, is buyer beware. Is this poll coming about an issue or in a geography where nothing else has been done? Right? Then it's going to get extra buzz, but you should just be careful, especially if you don't know the record. But I'd say make sure that they are releasing the methodology that they use, Find out if it passes the smell test. Do the results seem insane? And then beyond that, use it as a piece of information. But again, the real change, I think, from polling in 2000s, early 2000s to polling today, is that polling is not the only information out there, and you really have to calibrate it with other data that you know.
Doug, thanks for
Thank
telling
you,
us how
Ken.
it really is.
Real pleasure.